I believe, too. And we've always focused on the history of Shakopee, not the whole Scott County, although we do connection with the Scott County Historical Society also. And as we do any presentation, we always want to make sure that the Shakopee Heritage Society wants to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional land of the Dakota people. And we honor the gratitude, the land itself, and the people who had stewarded it throughout the generations, including the Ojibwa and other indigenous nations. I'm also letting you know that I gave you a handout, which is the ones that we're going to talk about today. And if you look on the bottom of the back part, it tells you that you can actually locate, if you go on to the Shakopee Heritage Society site, we have 300 people listed there. There are brochures that look like this. And each of them has, this is of course the first one we'll talk about. And so it talks about those people, okay? So, so what we're doing is basically you can go online and you can find each of them. And it tells you how to do them. And if there's any questions, just let me know. But I want you to also know that if you are interested in joining the Shakopee Heritage Society, it costs $20. And if you do so and you fill the form out today, you'll get all of the brochures that we talked about today. So that's worth it if you're interested. Fill out the form, you have them here. So that's a good way to just have that information. All right. So we're starting about the people of Shakopee, and believe me, we have a lot for downtown. So this is really just the beginning of this. But we thought it was very good ones to start with. And I like to start here because I like the library, and I always remember the library, even when it was before another library. But there was never a library in Shakopee when it first started here for a long time. And but eventually, a group of people got together, women at that time, and they started a book club. And one of the members is the first person we're going to talk about, who's Ida Gertrude May Buck. Now, someone has a picture, right? You look at the picture, it's not very good. And it's from the, hi. The thing is from a, just so you know, it's from from the newspaper of Ida, and it's the only picture that they have of her. And boy, we've been looking all over for her, and all her relatives way back and what and so on. We haven't found one yet, but we do have pictures of her husband, who was a doctor in town. You get a picture up there. So there's Frederick Buck, right there. Okay? And so we're going to talk about the person. Ida, first of all, just so you know, she was born January 16th, 1883 in Kennebec, which is Ontario in Canada. Her husband was Dr. Frederick Buck. He grew up in Norwood, Canada. The parents were farmers. And after he graduated from high school, he spent 7 years working on the farm. And he said he hated every minute. I just think it's such a funny thing to respond. I mean, that was really, he said he hated farming. So while his father, apparently his father, Frederick's father, said, I don't think she'd be a doctor. But her mother encouraged her. And by the age of 24, he entered the University of Toronto, and he became a doctor. And then he heard about Shakopee, okay? And at that point in Shakopee, this was in 1911, okay? I should pass this. you're a person, so now you know where they are, right? All right. So it's interesting. So he heard about Shakopee, and they needed a doctor here. So in 1911, he moved here, and most of his he went on with buggy or on foot here in Shakopee for the 1,500 people who lived here. Okay. He also worked a lot with the Dakota who lived in this area also. After he was here about a year, he went back to Norwood and he married his sweetheart, who was Ida. And Ida was a nurse. So that worked perfect. They moved back here. Now you got the doctor, you got the nurse, you're all set, right? And when Ida moved here, she joined the Book Lover Club. And the Book Lover Club was organized in 1903. It's still in business. So how many years is that? This is just a choice, which is if anybody's good at math. It is now 2024. So how long? What? Very good. Yeah. See, I always figure that at least one person is really good in math. It's not me, so I never am sure, and I have to like write it down and do the little thing. But it's interesting. It was organized in 1903. It was women in Shakopee, and mostly it was pretty, what do you call it? Smart women, right? They probably had a lot of money. Somebody has money, okay? They each had to contribute $1 a year. And they met at 3 p.m. They also sometimes would go play a play or an opera or a special event in St. Paul. And Ida joined the club. Okay, so she joined. And it was fine. And then she got pregnant by who? Dr. Frederick Buck, we hope. We're not sure about that part, but that's our guess. And they had a child who ended up going to school here in Shakopee, okay, his daughter. But after she's had her child, within 2 years, she became blind, okay? That must have been pretty hard to be in a 1,500 people town, and she's blind. So Ida went to the Faribault School for the Blind. You know where that is? And Faribault, just checking, but it's also good because that Faribault is going to tie into one of the other ones we talk about today, okay? So he went there to the blind, she learned Braille, and she got a special reading machine. I don't know where you put this thing. Something to show. Well, you just have to look at my picture, I guess. A little picture like this of what it looked like. And she was able to read books. And I just find it so interesting because she she got the machine to read the books for the book club. And she continued to go to the book holders club. In fact, one of the persons said she was very humorous and witty. It's a nice thing to say. She also had a seeing eye dog. And actually she had 3 dogs over time, right? And she used to go around Shakopee with her seeing eye dog. And again, here's a picture of the golden anniversary of the book club where you have the picture of her. And you can barely, you can't even tell who she is hardly. That's why we have that picture there, which you can't tell really what she looks like too much, you know. But we just know that she actually was in the book club. She talked about the books. She read the books, but she was blind. And I think that's just kind of an interesting thing. I knew I had it. Pass that along. I knew I had it somewhere. All right. So it's just an interesting thing, and there's also stories about her often going with the seeing eye dog, going along the place to find people who needed help. and then she would give things, and then she'd go back. And of course, the seeing eye doc would go along First Street and stop at where her doctor's office was, and then she'd know where to go up and go to the thing. She ended up dying on October 9th, 1957, and she's buried in Valley Cemetery in Shakopee. She's on the force. And the Shakopee Book Club is still in business. It's still done.
Oh.
And as of last year, they added a man to the group. That's what I know, but it's also a really interesting story. And if you look at the Shakopee newspapers over time, it talks about all the different celebrations for the book club. And that's again Ida Buck. Okay? So they lived various things. She was mostly on First Avenue, but eventually they went on Fourth Avenue? Third Avenue, sorry. Which is now for sale, I believe, her place.
Yeah, they're selling it.
They're selling it. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of interesting too. And I won't remember, but I do have information, of course, on the brochures here. Oh, I guess I look here. In here, in terms of, he died in 1978. So, of course, he was on 3rd Avenue. You know the exact address?
Okay, it's
She's
430
related somehow.
we lived in 437, so that must be like 433 or something like that.
That almost sounds familiar.
Okay.
East-west. East.
Yep.
East 3rd.
Okay. So again, if you're interested in joining the Shakopee Heritage Society, you will get the brochures. But it's also online, and that says it on the back of the thing if you want to go forward.
It's 421 3rd Avenue East.
Say that again, please.
421.
21.
Okay.
They're the second house? Third house
Yes,
from
it's
the
on
corner,
that side.
east of Spencer.
Yeah. I know I've been there for a few times, so I should know,
Yeah.
same thing. Okay, so that's our first person on our list, which is Ida, okay? And again, what makes her interesting, besides the fact that she was a nurse, she became blind, she learned how to do Braille, she had a seeing eye doc, and she joined the book club, and she was married to Dr. Buck. And who is related? Someone here, someone in the Shakopee Heritage Society was born.
Oh, he delivered?
He was
You
a
mean?
deliverer,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
he lived till 78.
Do you remember who?
No, I don't remember
I
hearing that.
remember that. All right. The second person that we're going to see is across the street. And the idea is we could move across the street. Do you want to move across the street or just stay here for this first one before we're going? Just stay here?
Yeah.
Is it okay until you who are freezing?
It's fine.
Okay.
I'm getting used to it.
I'm comfortable.
All right. So pass this a little
thinking
back
of
to
sweater
someone.
in
Just
my
hold down for our next one. Okay. The next person is, you look over there and you see Pablo's Mexican restaurant over there. Okay? And the person that we talk about, the next person, is Pablo Edward Schwarden. I can't say that. I knew I wouldn't say it right, but I blame it on my stroke. How do you say it again?
Swazdale.
We'll say you're correct. All right. And we
That's how
mentioned
Becky
this-
pronounces it anyway.
Well, that's right,
She's
exactly.
married to
So,
him.
so they better be right. And it's because actually this restaurant was started in 1986, and that's what we think. It's kind of interesting because Paul, or Pablo, was born on April 24th, 1949 in San Diego, California. So the person whose last name is Schwadel.
Schwazdell.
Okay.
Or Dale, depending on
A
how.
name like that has a Mexican restaurant. It seems kind of strange, right? When you think about it. Because Paul's father was German American. His mother, however, was Bridget Vicky Florence Perez.
Schweizer.
Schwazdale. Schwazdale.
She was a Mexican American who grew up in Newton, Kansas. And she grew up cooking Mexican food. Okay? So in San Diego, California, Paul married Anne Marie Menden, who was born July 25th, 1947 in Marystown. Okay? Now, to understand a little bit about this, okay, Anne Marie married Flavia Ronald Geis, but they got divorced, okay? Anne Marie's parents were Ralph Menden and Dolores Geis Menden. His grandparents were Jacob Menden, Teresa Claire, Herbert Geis, and Mamie, oh, that's wrong, how do you say it? Mamie, thank you, Kerber, guys. You can tell when I'm good at remembering things. You have to know I did have a stroke. I had to learn how to walk, talk, and obviously I'm not so good at some things when I have to say it. But just so you know, I write it, I can see it, but I don't necessarily say it, so just so you know. All right. So we know that the two of them married October 21st, 1972 in San Diego. Okay, so Claire Anne Marie Menden headed out to California and they married. They had 3 children, Edward, Teresa, and Ron. Paul, who was Pablo, right, worked as a firefighter. Okay. And often then, Paul, Anna, and the children would come to Minnesota, and they spent their time in Marystown and Shakopee. And Paul noted that there was no Mexican restaurant in Shakopee in the 1980s, or before then either. So when he returned to San Diego, Paul retired from firefighters, and he worked with other Mexican cooks to learn about the restaurant business. Paul said, I feel Shakopee's ready for a Mexican restaurant. The town's grown so fast, I'm surprised that there's so many people that like Mexican food in the area, which is true, okay. And so, because Anne Marie Menden, S, I'm not going to be able to say it, so I don't know why I should even mention it, but anyway, she missed her family in Marystown. So in 1986, they moved back here and they opened the Pablo's Mexican restaurant, which is right across the street. Okay. It's across the street, it was called Huber Building. Okay. It was the last location for the Strunk Pharmacy, which is kind of interesting, or the old drugstore, which was, of course, it had been located, and you'll find out when we go down there, on First Avenue, on the north side of the street, okay? But then eventually, when that was going to tear down and stuff, they moved over here, and they closed that in June of 1977. That was after 120 years of service as a drugstore. And then that place became a Sweet Treat ice cream parlor and restaurant. Does anybody remember that place?
Yep.
Oh, I do too. Specifically, what was kind of, There's certain ones you go there all the time for. I don't know why, but anyway, that was open in 1978, and the person who was running that was Cindy Strand. And what's interesting about this is that she was 18 when she started the business, and so she was the youngest business owner in Shakopee. Okay, and that was very popular when I was young, but it may seem because it was ice cream. What was it? Birthday cake ice cream. I don't know why. And nowadays they have it in stores, but at that time you do this. It was only found. Okay, so eventually she was there and did that business, and then in 1986 it became Pablo's Mexican Restaurant. And that place has been in business for 38 years and counting. With
Wasn't there a Chinese restaurant before that?
What's that?
Yeah, Ontario's dentistry.
Used to be
Yes,
there too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Lavender
Pablo only had part of the building.
Part
On
of
this
the
side,
building,
yeah, right
And
on
then they
this.
slowly expanded.
I think Lavender Lady was on the other side.
What
Lavender Lady?
was that?
Here. Yeah. Those
I
are
didn't
two
remember.
halls
Yeah,
with businesses
one on each
on
side,
them.
yeah.
So after, I don't realize. Oh, that's I gotta find out more about that one.
And
That's for a very short time though. For that
it was
one.
a Chinese restaurant too.
Oh, what? After which time?
Well, I don't know, but in there,
In the thing.
before Pablo's, it was
It
Chinese.
was-
The Chinese then moved to the old Skelly station,
And then they got
and then they got taken down because of all the
because of this thing that happened there.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that time. That's interesting. Good, great memory.
I have one Pablo story I have to tell. I always remember this. The Star Tribune came out and ate there and reviewed it and everything. And their biggest complaint was because if it's Mexican food, it's supposed to be hot, and this isn't hot. And the people said, "Why do you think we like it? That's why it's so popular."
I do think it's Tex-Mex,
That's-
and if you ask, they will make it more.
Oh yeah.
They'll spice it up for you.
More hot. But I think for a lot of people, it was perfect for the time when you were
It is. It
just
still
making
is.
that
You don't
adjustment,
like hot things.
because a lot of the
American
people
Mexican.
in the town were not used to that experience. Once after that, then it's not a problem. But at that time, it was a big thing.
We're all German, Irish, Norwegian.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
don't-
A lot.
we don't
Exactly.
do-
Nobody can figure this.
We don't do
But it's
spicy.
so funny because it became and it's still popular, and it's still technically a lot of you can get it, and it won't be that hot.
No, it's
But anyway,
eatable, edible.
It's
Unless you get
interesting
their shredded
because-
beef, that is really
when they got that restaurant, they
Depends on the
had
day.
two authentic Mexican chefs, Tony Ortiz and Ernesto G. They became like the help, getting it started, and they had to have the pots made from Mexico. The paintings on the walls were painted, especially for Pablo's, by a man in Mexico. The drapes in the windows were all made real. So it's really interesting, and I don't know if I have the thing, but anyway, there's a thing with like the ads for the paper, which has the thing, it's how much it costs and stuff. And for example, if you want to have chimichanga on Friday, it's $4.05. It's just interesting, but it's really the whole thing is just kind of interesting in terms of the things. They serve at least 700 patrons a day, or a night, I should say, there. Eventually, more recently, Anne Marie Mendez died on April 19, 2011. She was buried at St. Mary's at the Purification Cemetery in Marystown. And eventually, Pablo decided to retire in 2015. And his two sons, Ed and Ron, took over the business. It's interesting because they talked I was reading some articles, they talk about Ed. He was 12 when he started working at the restaurant. Excuse me, is that even allowed?
It is when you're family.
Family.
Yes.
Okay. He said that all of the great recipes that the customers came from, they're the same. He said family is a key component of the family and their business. Not only do Ed and Ron work at the restaurant, but their wives and children participate as well. And their sister, Teresa, also worked part-time at Pablo's. They said it's kind of nice to see the kids, they serve the food, our wives take an active role. We really are family orientated, said Ed. Ron, who's worked at Pablo's since he was 18, added, it's how we grew up. Now today in Shakopee there are many Mexican and Tex-Mex places. There's El Toro, Don Ramon Street Tacos, Bravos. There's a lot of fast food places, Taco Bell, Taco John's, Chipotle.
Mr. Taco.
How do you say?
Cadoba.
Yeah.
I love that place, but I didn't know anything. Okay, there's also a new one that's just open straight down here, which is Mr. Tacos, Mexican Street,
That was Bravo.
which used to be Bravos. Bravos is still here, moved over a different part of town, okay? But it's interesting just to remember that here, the Pablo and Paul, it was the first Mexican restaurant in Shakopee, and it continues to be a popular place since 1986. Here for this time is Maximus, although we call them Max, of course. Maximum Guido, G-U-I-D-O. How do you say that?
Don't say Guido.
Thank you.
Is that?
Wormerskirchen. And you've heard the name Wormerskirchen for a long time, probably in Shakopee.
Yeah.
But specifically, we're talking about the Chevy garage fire, which happened on September 30th, 1959, right here, this building here. Okay? This building is no longer there, obviously, but we'll find out why. All right. Okay, Max was born in New Prague. His parents were Paul Wormerskirchen and Clara Marie Beckus Wormerskirchen. And after a few years, they moved to Shakopee. And after, when he graduated to 8th grade, he decided he was done with school. Okay? So he quit. And he took a job with the farm here in Shakopee, the Grumish farm. He was 14 years old. And while he was working in the farm, he fell in love with the farmer's daughter, Beatrice. There's no B, okay? And eventually then, okay, Max went to Alaska for several years. This was in the 1950s. He saved money by working in Alaska. He came back, he bought a home. He then proposed to B. And he accepted. And so he moved back to Shakopee, and they had 3 children, Sandra, Stephen, and Larry. Okay? So there's our picture here. So bring it up so everybody can see. Okay. Now, Max's job first, when he was here then, he worked in Rar Malting. You know where that is, right? Right over there, okay? He was work as maintenance worker for about 3 years. And he volunteered at the fire department in December of 1958. And I remember a lot of people said, well, why did you volunteer to do this? Because at that time, it wasn't a paid thing, it was just a thing to do. And he said, it just seemed to be the right thing to do. It was a way to help others. Okay? And Clarine Rice said he knew everybody in town, knew everybody's name. He would do anything for anybody. The whole town liked him. Okay? So, that's where we're going. He's doing great. 3 kids, doing great. Suddenly, okay, one time, it's very early in the morning on September 30th, 1959. That is 1 month and 1 day before I was born. However, I wasn't born in Shakopee, so just, okay. But he was there. At that time, September 30th, 1959, they said there's a fire at the Cecil Hughes auto dealership in downtown Shakopee, and that was located right here. And we know about this because he never returned. It was an awful fire, okay? It was hard to put out. There were explosions from the gasoline tanks, grease, and oil made it difficult. And they had firefighters from Shakopee, Carver, Chaska, and Jordan fought the fight for over 5 hours. And here's just a look of the picture of people, the thing inside. It was a big, huge fire, okay? Well, I don't say that, I wasn't there, I can't really say it, but when you read about it, it sounds very bad. Okay, so Max, who joined the department 9 months before, offered to take the place of an older firefighter and climb to the roof of the building. Okay? He had to help ventilate the garage and douse the flame from above. Okay? And again, the pictures they have of here, and I have pictures somewhere, but anyway, really does show, the fire was just awful. Of course, in Shakopee, when there's a fire like that, what happens? Everybody comes to see it, right? But it was during the night. Mostly it was happening a lot during the night, but there were a lot of people there watching, okay? But it was about 2 in the morning, and the roof collapsed, sending Max below into the smoke. They said he hit the roof of a large concrete cut within the building, mostly used as an office or for record storage. But nobody knew about that. And the fellow firefighters couldn't find him enough to save. Okay? And there's actually another picture out here too. It's a little hard to see, but just in terms of, it was a mess. Okay? Bless you.
Thank you.
They said it was really, there was heroic attempts to rescue. So the fire chief, Art Dubois, and other firefighters who entered the building again and again trying to search for him. The body was actually brought out about 4:30 a.m. The garage was covered about a half block on Lewis Street, so that's this area here, okay, was a complete loss. The damage was at $200,000. But in today's time, it would be about $1.7 million damage. Okay. Max was only 28 years old, and he left behind his wife, Bee, and his 3 preschool children. And that was the only firefighter who ever died in the line of duty in Shakopee. Okay. And of course, he's buried at the Catholic Cemetery on 10th Street in Shakopee. If you think of it, a little close to near Sweeney School, a little over from that area. And it's interesting because every year on that date they do a whole ceremony with the firefighters. So it's a very important remembrance. And in fact, if you go inside this building, if you want, I don't know if you can now, but inside one of the places, what is it? What did they have? Let's see. Oh, not the dental one. I think it's the Allstate. Well, it's one of these three bottom ones. I have to see. You'll see when they come in. They have pictures inside of all of the fire and all the stuff that goes on there too, just to remember that. But it's just interesting. But anyway, so that's Max, and he's the one that we remember a lot because he was the first firefighter and the only one in Shakopee who died in the line of duty. Look at the thing. It says what year it is up above.
1893.
1893. Okay.
Cowboys.
Okay.
No, I should an ad, but it's okay. All right. Charles Augustus Lindbergh. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Just generally? He's the person who flew from New York to Paris, I think. Okay? But what's interesting is this actually building here at the end here, on December 19th, 1919, there's an article in the Shakopee County Argus said that they were setting up a bank here called the People's National Bank. It was opened on March of 1920. It was also a post office building before there was a post office over there. And there's a lot of ads in the newspapers about the People's National Bank articles. I was looking for this, but I know it's somewhere in here. But anyway, what's kind of interesting about this thing is there's actually a bank if you actually go inside, which you can do. And I did talk to Billy just recently, and he said, if you feel free, you can come right in, go right on in if you want. So if you want, I usually go into the veil there to go through. You just go there and say, can I go into this part of it? Because that's a custom tailor shop now that's tied into the thing. They're happy to come in and let you just go in and see the stuff there. And they have in there all kinds of information about Charles Lindbergh. The reason is because when they was open, they had several people who were in charge. And one of them was C.A. Lindbergh, who was the father of Charles Lindbergh. Okay. And of course we knew because Charles, we know him, he was called Lucky Lindy. He was an American aviator, author, inventor, explorer, and social activist. He was a barnstormer. He flew around Minnesota throwing posters about his father's election to people below. They like dropping them up from the thing. Okay. He's also really well known because at one point he used to fly and then he'd park right near St. Mark's Church, right there is where he landed, which is just kind of interesting, but okay. But at one point in 1923, he was flying over, he was here between here and like the landing in Shakopee, in other words, Memorial Park area, that area, then just beyond that area, and he crashed kind of in the Shakopee Savage border. He cut himself free and was met by a farmer who had seen the plane crash. And 4 years before then, he also had traveled here in Shakopee. He would go, there would like be fairs that were happening, and he would give them the first close eyes to see actually what a plane looked like. And that was a new thing for a lot of people. They said that, Bill Wormskirchen said that Jenny, the plane, would touch down near St. Mark's Church and then would fly around the area. Okay. And of course there are other people too, so there would actually be signs for people who want to go have a ride in a plane. And that was such a big thing at that time. You know, of course it was the first time to actually do that concept. But what we know about and why it's tied into this building is because Charles borrowed $900 from the People's Bank so it could buy a plane. Okay. What's interesting about that plane, okay, that he bought, is he bought it so he could fly on his plane around, right? But he didn't make a lot of money from that. And they know that by the time 4 years later, when he went to Paris and do that whole big thing, he had only paid $50 back so far of the $900 from this thing. Okay. Now, I make that because, my opinion, okay, you know that eventually he became very popular because he flew non-stop solo from New York to Paris, France, okay? And so there's a whole big thing about he was the first person who did that, stuff like that. Now, they called it the Spirit of St. Louis. My opinion, it should be called the Spirit of Shakopee because we owned that plane, okay? We were the people who did that, so that's just my thing. But we do know that eventually he came back from Paris, is well known. It's also interesting because the people from Shakopee knew that he still owed $850 for this thing. And so eventually, it took him several years. Some people from Shakopee went to St. Louis where they had a big thing about that, and they actually said, excuse me, he still owes this money. And the backers there gave him the money for this thing. So that's why he said, well, he did it finally, so then we don't have to call it, we have to call it whatever they call it, St. Louis, whatever. Spirit of St. Louis. But it's just kind of interesting because of that. And because of that, if you go into this dress shop, and I really would say, you know, take your time, not necessarily now because we're going to continue on, but just to actually go inside and go in and see this thing because they have the actual bank vault there.
Safe, yeah.
And it's all painted. It's really beautifully done. And it's just some nice things that are there related to Shakopee. Okay? So that's about Charles Lindbergh. What we talk about is Elizabeth K. Reese. There's your picture up there. Okay. She was born August 26, 1874, in Shakopee. Her father was Jacob Reese, who started the bottling company that you're familiar with, right? And if you want to look at what they look like, I know in Bill's Toggery, if you go in, they'll actually show you some examples of that too. But Reese was Elizabeth was an interesting person. She became a nurse, and during the 1918 flu pandemic, she serviced day and night. You know, it was the flu, right? And then she came back. She owned the Rock Spring Cafe during Prohibition. Okay. Now, it's kind of an interesting thing because we talk about her a lot because it was actually 5 years before the passage of the amendment that granted women the right to vote. The city of Shakopee elected its first female mayor. Do you know how many female mayors we've had in Shakopee so far?
No, two. I bet. I know Laban's. Another one?
And then there's one more.
Oh, don't know that.
Yes, for 2 years. Feel that? Okay. No, I don't. I can't remember right now. But I will remember. She was only there for like 2 months. But yeah, that was it. The rest have all been male. It's interesting because when she started doing it, she was elected without seeking office. She was elected in 1925 and again in 1927. And it's interesting because in the 1927, she used to have what was called Lady Mayor and her trio. And it would be the 3 men. There was Harris Demers, August Kruger, and Sylvester Devaney, I guess. And they used to sing. It's the 2 thing about with her. That's how they do their like her advertisement about her mayor. Her trio. Okay, so it'd be interesting to remember. But what we remember this a lot about is, of course, the Rock Spring Cafe. It was operated by Edward Feed Cafe. It was a software drink parlor. Okay? But what's kind of interesting is that when people used to come here, they'd look in the window. This is the common thing. Because they noticed that along here, and along the street, there are a lot of people in town, just generally, people had Fords or Chevys. But in the Rock Spring Cafe, they had cars that were like really fancy. So it's kind of weird. So that's why people always look inside to see what was going on. And they said what was interesting is when they looked inside, there was nothing. This was supposed to be a cafe, but there was like nobody here. Except on one corner, there's one guy sitting there. And they found that was the guard there. And he was at the basement door. And so he would check. And of course, there was mostly people not from Shakopee, but from St. Paul, who would come here, go inside, and then they go downstairs where there's slot machines and the gambling. Okay. It's kind of interesting because this was all over Shakopee. There were slot machines everywhere. In bars, in restaurants, gas stations. There wasn't in the ice cream parlor thing, but almost every other place had that. And Shakopee, like other places, they used to have a person who'd call them from other places when there was a raid coming. And they'd call and say, they're coming, right? And they'd call each place, and they'd all call all the other places. And then they'd have to shut down everything. Sometimes they had things that covered it, you wouldn't see anything. Some places they had, like downstairs here, there was stuff where they'd take the slot machines, put them onto a truck, and bring it to a safe house, where they save them, keep them for a day or two until the raid was gone, and then they bring them back. They said there were 30 or 40 safe houses where the slot machines were stored for hours or days until it was safe to return them. I know that there's one on Spencer Street across from St. Mary's School. Back then there was St. Mary's now it's not anymore. But I know this, I see one every time I look at that room. That was the one that they used to, where they hide things in, okay? I talked to Joe Jens, this was in 1999. He said Shakopee was really a community by itself, cut off by the Minnesota River and the river bottoms. Back in the 1930s, the town was a little Las Vegas. We had 33 beer joints at one time, and they had notorious nightclubs like Rock Spring and the Riviera. They were all over the place, actually. They said people, including gangsters, came here for booze, women, and gambling. And the mayor, the sheriff, and the city council men weren't any women at that point. Went along with it all. Eventually, the governor of the state told them that the sheriff had to clean up the whole place, and that eventually and did that. And so eventually this became just a regular place. It became Gamble's, right?
Yep.
Remember Gamble's?
Gamble's.
And then it became now Turtle's 1890 Social Center. Elizabeth, if I remember correctly, yeah, she resigned in 1928, became postmaster here in Shakopee. And then she died on May 6, 1949. But if you really want, there's a lot, we've done presentations and we continue to do presentations about the gambling that was going on in Shakopee, and it was all over. I mean, all over. It was good. We had fun. It was very, and I think it's still somewhat, you can still, the connection is there, but it really was, this was they said it was called either Little Chicago or Las Vegas, you know, of the area. And it was pretty, I can think of it, there's some people who were making a lot of money. Unfortunately, it wasn't me. It was before my time.
I've heard there's tunnels that
Yeah,
run
okay.
under
Yes.
some of these buildings, you know, down to the river. Is that, you know?
Yes, that is true. There's a lot of discussion about that. There was in the paper about it too, and some people said no. But if you actually look on this, on the other side, underneath out there were tunnels, and there's tunnels that go from here across the street there too. At one point, they stopped them, blocked them, because they're worried about fire that would go from here, from that side of the street, and it would come over to this side of the street. So that's where it stopped a lot of them. But there's still, if you look at, if you go down this street a little bit, there's a place, I'm trying to remember what it's called now, but you can go inside and actually look, and they'll show you where it is. You can go down. You can't, I can't fit to go down, but to go down and down, I had people go down there and they took pictures of it and stuff. So, but they're all blocked off.
So
But
if
yes,
there's a
it was.
raid, people could go down the tunnel and go to
Out
the
to
river
the
and
river,
run away?
and then they'd have boats to take the things away.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it was, the problem is there's so many, a lot of people who remembers a lot of it, but a lot of them are gone now, and nobody wanted to write it down. A few people wrote a little bit down, but a lot of them don't know for sure, but let's be real. It happened a lot.
Well, and it was prohibition too,
It
so
was
I mean, they were
prohibition,
gambling
so
and
right.
drinking, neither one was legal.
Exactly, both things were needed. Picture, I'm just going to pass it just because this is about Mexican restaurant. Here's the First National Bank. I want to let you know just generally, I'm not going to speak specifically about Samuel Pont and about the statue that's back there.
On the other side.
Okay, but I want you to take some time at yourself to look. There's actually information about here on this, and there's a lot more information about this, and there's also a thing out there. Now, you see that statue
remember
back
those
there, which
places.
is the Shakopee statue there? People confuse that so much. There actually were 3 Shakopees. Shakopee actually was the name, okay? This is the 3rd one, is that one. The town was named after the 2nd one. They're all called Shakopee, right? Shakopee 1, Shakopee 2, and this was called Little 6, okay? So just so you know, so the statue that's further back there is the same artist, who's a Native American artist, who did this statue also. Just so you know. But I just want you to know, that one over there is number 3, Little 6. But the actual name, the one that's tied into the Shakopee, the name is number 2. Okay? So I just makes you that. But here I want to specifically talk about the trunk drugstore, and it was right next door to that was the First National Bank here in Shakopee. So they'd both be on this side of the street here. Here's just a thing where it is. And you can just pass these along as we go over. I keep forgetting these, and so I'll just continue. You can just pass them along to as we go. All right. So the first one we might have mentioned here is Charles Manage. He's the Paul Revere of Shakopee. There's a picture of him right up here. You know? And he's an interesting person. He was born in 1846 in Madison, Wisconsin. His father was French, but his mother was Ho-Chunk Indian. Okay? Okay? We do know that at one point he wanted to join in the U.S. Army, but he was too short. So he used high heel boots. And it worked, and he got enlisted in the Army. He was involved with that. He eventually was, in 1865, he was discharged from Nashville, Tennessee. And he and his wife is Eliza Faribault Manage. And that's the time with the Faribault that we talked about over there. And the Faribault, actually their house was at the very end of Shakopee at that time. It's not end now, but it's basically where the Shakopee house is now. Which used to be
Dangerfield.
Right across the street there.
Yeah.
But now it's in the landing because it was one of the first thing. But just so you know that they're there. Okay. So they married, Charlie married Eliza. Remember that Eliza's parents was Oliver Faribault, who was part Dakota, and Wonkin Yankawin, who was full Dakota Indian. They moved back to Shakopee. They lived there at the place over there. He was a painter, a paper hanger. He was also served in the police force. He was well known, and while he was older, while he became very old, he would still ride into town on a horse ride carriage. In other words, they were starting to have cars and stuff at this point. He still had the thing with the thing to do the family shopping. And the reason that's important is on December 12th, 1929, the First National Bank was robbed. They knew the name of the people, William McNormy and George Larkin and Paul Morris. The three of them strolled into the bank to rob it. Okay? Now, at the same time, he's 82 years old at that time. Charles, driving on his buggy, comes downtown, realizes what happened, yells out at the top of the voice, "The bank is being robbed! Get your guns!" And he drove this way, and then back and across, and there was shooting going on all over the place. And he continued to say, "Get the guns!" And all these people had guns because everybody did at that time, and they all were sitting there ready, even though he had this, this was going on, and he helped. And when that happened, the pistols cracked, and a machine gun spat into the Wicked Harmony. And there's actually pictures which you passed around of the bank robbery afterwards. They took these pictures, but you can see kind of where it was located. What's interesting also is that actually, even before this, someone let them know, the banking protection services let the sheriff, which is Wetman, know that someone might be robbing the bank. So they were ready.
Uncle Joe.
They knew it was coming, right? So the 3 robbers were caught. Luckily, no one in Shakopee was killed. The 3 men all got, well, one was killed, I think 2 was alive but hurt. They said several cars on First Avenue were shot at, and several cars had flat tires. It's also interesting because then after that, in the new, I think it was the 4th of July parade, they actually had him in his little buggy going down. He was the front person waving to everybody like that too.
Marshall.
And eventually, in 10 years, or I think he was 91 years old, in 1938, he died. And he, of course, at that time was a Civil War veteran, sole survivor of the General Shields post of the Grand Army of the Republic, and of course, the Paul Revere of Shakopee. He died. And it's interesting that when he died and had the funeral, almost every business in town was closed to salute the old soldier. So that's the story of Charles Minaj, the Paul Revere of Shakopee. Okay. And the next one that we're going to mention The next one that we just mentioned here is related to the Strunk Pharmacy, which is right next door to the First National Bank at that time. We know that in 1878, someone came to Shakopee and convinced people that they should have telephones. The telegraphy system was operated between Strunk's drugstore, the depot, and the residence of Father Plut's residence, and the courthouse. So there's 4 things going on at that time. In the newspaper, that Henry Hines noted that they were nice playthings for little boys at each end. But at that point, eventually, the drugstore, Joseph Strunk ran the drugstore. And it was not until 1881 and 1882 that telephones were installed in a few places, including the drugstore. Long distance didn't happen until 1892. And why we know about this, and the only thing in the Shakopee story that talks at all about Asian Americans in Shakopee was that he said Joseph Strunk rang the bell, made the first long distance call in September of 1892. He called to the Noyes brother in St. Paul by way of Minneapolis. And for several years, that booth at the back of the store was the only long-distance service for several years. A Chinese-American man, no name, would call his friend in Minneapolis in 1892, according to the Shakopee story. They said he yelled loudly to make sure it went through, which is, of course, what people do too with the phones. You know, you yell loud anyway. They said many of the men at the store would wonder if he would just open the door of the booth with a sing-song conversation would reach its destination easier than over the wire. And that's all we know about him. Except since then we've talked about later there, and we'll talk another time, but there's other Chinese laundries that started and other things later. But this was the first one that happened in 1892. This is Samuel Friedman. He was born in 1893 and died in 1966. And he used to have a store right across the street called the Bargain Store. And there was a fire there in September of 1934. Pass this one, just the Ferdman Bargain Store was located on the south side of First Street. The family lived upstairs, so I think we see where Turtles is over there. Right above there is, I think, next to it. We're not really sure. But we do know that there was an apartment there that they lived. There was Samuel Ferdman, his wife Anna, and their 2 children, Lucy and Max, lived there. They were one of the first, not the only, but one of the first Jewish family in Shakopee. And there's an ads that we pass along from like their newspaper, which talks about the ads for the specials for exactly for, if you want Caro syrup, it's 55 cents. You know,
For a
big one.
10-pound pail.
Right? Great. But of course, this is September of 1934. There was a low explosion followed by a roar of fire. It shattered the store at 3 a.m. The fire siren wailed, roused people from Shakopee who started there. They hurried to the scene in the various stages of dress and undress, says the Shakopee story. Family included Sam, his wife Anna, Max, and Lucille, barely escaped with their lives. Also in the apartment was his aged mother, Rebecca Sharon, and Miss Gladys Price, who had to escape quickly with only their night clothes on. I don't know what the nightclub exactly means, but anyway, this is, I don't know if I had a picture of this or not, but that's where the location of it is. And the thing, but it's basically, and it says on there, Ferdman, so that's when it was there. They know that the fire started, it headed up the store, filled the entire room of the brick structure with flames. The area inside the fire leading to the Ferdman apartment was ablaze before they awakened. They said it started in the storeroom. There was a stock of rubbers, not the rubbers you're thinking, but rubbers, socks, gloves, wooden goods, groceries, flour, and bulk food stuff, which were starting burning and spread all over to the second floor and over. According to the August Tribune, on October 4th, windows burst from the building and liberated the flame leaped up the walls, sending pillars of smoke and sparks towering skyward. The tin roof which covered the structure made it a veritable furnace. Power wires leading to the building caused fire and stretched glowing streaks across the smoke-heavy sky. Fallen wires endangered firemen and hundreds of spectators. 3 streams of water were played at the fire from many pumps. It was so bad that Leo Siebenauer, his fire chief at that time, summoned the the Chaska Fire Department. From 3 till 6 a.m., they fought the blaze. The job was a big one, and the manner in which they handled it won nothing but praise. This prompt response and effective work of the Chaska Fire Department earned lots of compliments. They're glad that because of that, it didn't head to all the other buildings. It was not until the eastern sky reddened with the dawn before the fire got under control. By that time, Ferdman's building was burnt out and the adjacent store of R.C. Klein was damaged. They said at that time it was $20,000 worth of loss, partly with insurance that helped. The damage to the building was estimated at $6,000. And they also said that before bed, Samuel had put a roll of bills in his trouser pocket before retiring. After the fire, he went with the fire department into the building to search for his glasses. They couldn't find anything. But a small portion of the trousers containing the pocket and the money was found. So that's we know about in terms of, and those people, we know that they were Jewish. I know that I remember talking to people who were older people here in Shakopee, and they used to talk about, remember, they'd go to the Jewish store to get so-and-so or whatever. So by the 1940 census, Sam and Anna were in Chicago, where they were a puppeteer for an apartment hotel. Eventually they moved to California. Anna died in 1963, Samuel died in 1966, and they both buried at the Congregation of Ahava Akra Cemetery, which is a place for Jewish people in San Joaquin. I can't know how to say that. Joaquin.
Joaquin.
Thank you. And I want to talk with that to the next one, because I think this was also one that's so interesting. So pass this along for someone to grab. This is Sophia de Levy, okay? And I bring this up because, again, when we talk about in the town, this town generally, we think about this place, we often think about it and think related to, it was, besides the Native American population who were here first, people came from the east, it was mostly Protestant or Catholic in the area, okay? So it's really strange to find Jewish people in town, but there were, and there were more than you think. And this one is especially interesting, and that's Sophia. She was born in Shakopee on May 17, 1919, okay? Her father was Samuel Benjamin de Levy. His mother was Frida. They lived in the Netherlands. It was a farming area. They had two daughters, Eddie and Helena. And then a son, Nathan, was born there, but died within 2 months. 2 years later, 1911, they, along with the two girls, moved to America. They moved to Marion Township in Iowa. It's an area that's about 725 people. They had two more children born there, Mary and David. And not long after, they moved to Shakopee. And on May 17, 1919, Sophia was born. So in the census, the U.S. Census in Shakopee in 1920 says there was 1,988 people living here. And they list the family, including this family, which had Benjamin, who was age 40. He was a livestock broker. Frida, his wife. Stella, who was 13. Lena, who was 11. They were all born in the Netherlands. May and David, who were both born in Iowa. And Sophia, who was 8 months old, according to the census, was born in Shakopee. And they were all Jewish. What's also interesting is about a year later, they were here, they moved back to the Netherlands. That threw me off really. I was asking some of my Jewish friends, it's like, why? And well, there's a lot of reasons. It could just be they had family back there and they wanted to go back. They could be, they didn't feel it was very comfortable here. It could, could be a lot of things. We don't know. But we do know that on May 11th, 1921, we know that they had another son born, Simon, who was born in the Netherlands. So that's when they were living there. They were fine. They were living in the Netherlands. Everything was fine until Adolf Hitler showed up. Okay? The Netherlands entered World War II in 1940 when the invaded German forces overran the country. They said 75% of the Dutch Jewish population was murdered in the Holocaust. And of course, we look at then this family and Sophia, right? And we know they were forced into a concentration camp in Poland. We know that their youngest child, Simon, died September 30th, 1942. Sophia, our person, died on January 21st, 1943. She was aged 23. And her brother David, who was born in Iowa, died on the same day. And that was at the Auschwitz concentration camp. That was in Poland. Sophia's father, Samuel, died in 1943. His sister, Helena, or Lena, died in 1943. Eddie, or also known as Stella, died in 1943. And her final sister, Mary, who was born in Iowa, died in 1944, all at the Auschwitz concentration camp. And so it's interesting because Samuel and his 6 children all died in the Holocaust, including the one child who was born in Shakopee. So isn't that kind of an interesting story?
I bet they're sorry they went back to the Netherlands.
Yeah, you're like, darn it, they should have stayed here.
Yes.
Okay, but it's interesting, it's a picture of him, but down below, if you look here, this building is this building. The exact same building is here, still, right up here. And it's a good place, by the way, okay? He was born in 1798 and died in 1899, okay? He's born in Wabasha in 1798. He was there for about 25 years. He joined the Red Wing Band for 15 years. And there are lots of pictures of John Shoto. And if you go online and just put that name, you'll find out more information about him. As well as, of course, we have brochures about him. He joined with the Little Six here in Tinta Otanra, which is the area it's a little further that way. But basically, if you think about Memorial Park area, that's where it was Tinta Otanra, which is the name of this place before it became Shakopee. And after the U.S. Dakota War, he became a scout. And in 1872, he returned to Shakopee as the leader of the Little Six Band. Shoto was smart. And here's his picture there, you can just see. Although I have to say one thing about the picture, this is kind of similar to my grandfather on my mother's side. He's dead when they take the picture.
Oh.
That's just weird to me. But anyway, it's the way it happens, okay? I just know that for a fact. But anyway, there are pictures of him. He's still alive that we have pictures too. But that's just kind of interesting to see. That's the picture they show of him. But the person, he was really smart. They said he used to go down to different shops where the rich people were here, okay, which is usually on First Avenue. Now a lot of those places are torn down, but there used to be a lot of rich people there. He would go there and he would knock on the door and ask for food if he was hungry. That was just a normal thing to do, actually, okay? If a housekeeper was there, they would fill them with lots of food, and Shoto was very happy, okay? But if the woman of the house answered the door, the rich woman would look disgusting at him and just give them 2 pieces of bread and little more. And it's just interesting that happened. And so they said what would happen is Shoto would point to his throat and gesture that it had a sore throat, and then he'd leave. It's like, forget that, I don't want that, you know? And then he'd go to the next place and get, find another one, okay? He knew that he could find something better at other houses where the people were more friendly. We also know about him that he was baptized in 1895 at St. Mary's Church in Shakopee. And they also talk about in January of 1899, he was about town. He's peering out of almost sightless eyes. And he'd always say, how, to all people, which is a merry greeting. How is a Dakota word for hello, okay? In fact, we talked about there's a woman, Helen, Lizzie really, was Everling. She was born in 1881 in Eagle Creek. And she remembers she was born in Eagle Creek, which is on the outskirts of a little town called Shakopee. Now, as you know, Eagle Creek is now part of Shakopee, right? Okay. She also says we later moved to the town of Shakopee. And she said they would see old Shoto in town. Old Shoto was the Dakota Indian John Shoto, who came to town occasionally. And Lisa remembers, she said, old Shoto walked with a cane. He would walk into our town and shout, woo, hoo, ha, ha, over and over. Old Shoto was so friendly and nice, and all the children loved her. Him, I should say. They would gather around him when he was in town and beg him to count in Dakota. And of course they would say, as John Dakota said, would then count. Do you know how to say in Dakota any of these numbers? Wanzi, this is me saying it, okay, so it's all wrong. Nunsa, that's number 2. Wankma, Topa, Zapta, and then number 6 was Shakpe. And then everybody cheered because that was Shakopee.
Yeah.
And so people remember that story. So just kind of a thing where people remember about them. And we know that eventually in January of 1999, at age 99, he died. His wife, Anna, survived her and died at age 90. Their daughter, Carolyn Moore, died as an infant in 1830 and is buried at Valley Cemetery at the Poppers Fields. And he's buried next to Dan Eddings, who is the African American who lived in Shakopee and was buried there at the Poppers Field. And so I can show you someday, when you go to the cemetery there in Shakopee, at Valley Cemetery, I can show you where both of them are. But actually, Carolyn has a tombstone, so it's just kind of interesting. Now I'm going to all right. We're going to continue on, but instead of moving over there, we're just going to stay here and talk about it, okay? So, pass that one to someone. Whoever's left, here's another one too.
I think everybody's.
Someone should, by now someone should have one, everybody, except the people who said they will not take them. One person, you probably have these. All right, but anyway, just so you know, hold the person up there. That's Mahala Conklin Shumway. You know Shumway Street in Shakopee? Okay, that's probably named after her husband. Would you show the other one, which is her husband? Oh no, you don't have it.
Okay, right
Who
here.
has that one? Okay,
right
that's Benjamin Emerson Shumway. Okay, probably was named after him, not her. But Mahala is really the one who's more interesting than the other one, I think. Okay, she was born in 1835 and died in 1909. They talk about Shumway Street. They talk about Benjamin Emerson Shumway, who helped build the Holmes Trading Post, and it's the named street that they have there. But just as important is the wife, Mahala Conklin Shumway. It's funny because in the history books, there's like 3 different history books that I've read, and they have things. Sometimes they just said she's a servant. They don't even say her name, it's just servant. Another says a servant girl, and another one says M ... Conklin. They don't remember the name except M, okay? But we do know a lot about her. She was born in Ohio. She moved with her family to Iowa. She was one of 18 children in her family, okay? Her father was William James Conklin. Her mother was Melina Easter Ankley Conklin Green Gideon. She was married a lot of times.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for that. There's actually a picture of her, actually. It's a little hard to see on this thing, but there's actually a picture of her. And you know, usually if you get a picture, it's usually because there's something that happened, which is true. She's called Easter, actually, is her first name. What's interesting about her, we know that her Mahala's father, which of course was William, was a drunk. Okay. We also know that Easter, her mother, was a large, muscular woman who took care of their large family, of their 18 children. Okay. On October 1st, 1856, William was drunk again. Easter, her mother, had enough. While her sons, Abinadab, I don't know how to say that, and Elijah held the father's shoulders, her mother took a 10-cent knife, stabbed the throat of William, and William died. What the heck?
I'll be in town for the weekend. Thanks for coming.
I'm sure it was an accident.
Okay. Now it's interesting. Okay. They said what happened, the reason we know about this is because in Iowa, Easter and her 2 sons were arrested for murder. Now, then they had to interview all the people who were around. And all the people who were there, except one, were members of the Conklin family. And they all said she acted in self-defense when it happened. Okay. In fact, according to the Conklin said, William, the father, had attempted to assault Easter with the butcher knife. And so Easter wrestled the knife with her, struck her on the neck, and then she died. And what's kind of interesting about this, they were acquitted. So it worked. Good witnesses, which is their family. But my guess, it was probably, he was drunk, and I'm guessing it was, I think the story is really interesting just by itself. Now, meanwhile, Mahala, her son, one of their daughters, right, she moved to St. Paul. Then she moved to Shakopee in 1851. She worked as a servant at Haywood Shanty, which is on Home Street and First Avenue. In other words, very end of this block, there was a shanty there, and that was what later became Coles and Barron's. Okay, that location was there was a shanty there, and she worked there. Okay, eventually, then she worked as a servant of William and Suzanne Shook Holmes. Remember Thomas Holmes, her brother, and their kids. So she was a servant there. And eventually, Benjamin Emerson Shumway got smallpox in the fall of 1852. After recovery, he moved to St. Paul, and then Mahala and Emerson married in 1853. In the Shakopee story and several other things, they say that they were married in Shakopee, but that was not true. They were married in St. Paul. And they also say in in three different the Minnesota Valley, all these newspapers things say that the Shumway went west and were killed by the Mormons. Not true. Okay? But that's what people say. But we do know that in 1859, the Shumways crossed the plains on an ox trail. They engaged in prospecting and mining in California and Nevada for 10 years, and they ran a stockyard ranch for 20 years. Now come back to Mahala again, okay? This is where she kind of is tied in somehow to her mother, I think. All right. Benjamin and Mahala and their 2 sons and 2 daughters lived in an isolated ranch in the mountains of California. Benjamin and her eldest son headed out for several days to get some cattle back, okay? So while they were gone, a band of northern Paiute Indians stole down from the ranch and left with all the horses except a few that were near the house. They were fast and quick, so Mahala and her children did not even discover it until the next day. Now Mahala was pissed off. So she directed her daughters, I should say, to prepare provisions, and the young son had to gather the remaining horses, and they got ready with their rifles and their ammunition. With Mahala in the lead, they headed out. The 3 women and a young boy headed up the trail to recover their property. They said Mahala and her children traveled all day and at night camped in the mountains. The next day they continued on. All day they followed the tracks, and at dusk they approached. They saw the smoke of a campfire. The Mahala ordered the horses tethered. With caution, they trekked forward to the camp. Of course, the Indians were right there, and there were their horses. Remember, Mahala was angry. I'm thinking past with their own family, you can understand that, right? So she whispered to her children to wait until all the Indians were in view, and then she told them to fire their weapons. The 4 rifles of Mahala and their 3 children slammed into the 4 Indians, who fell down dead. The other 2 Indians went to grab their guns, but they were shot again, killing the other 2. So those 6 northern Paiute Indians were killed. And they said, when people talk about that, according to Mahala, that was mountain justice has been done, she said. And it's also interesting because 2 days later, they arrived back home with their stock. But they not only had the horses, but they have 6 scalps, I should say, of the Indians who were set up on the fence posts as a warning to others. Yeah. Apple does not fall too far from the tree, right? All right. Mahala and Benjamin died in 1909 in Oregon, and of course we have their tombstone. So again, it is an interesting story, but boy. So in my opinion, if they're going to do Shumway Street, I think Majid Mahala Shumway Street. That's my thinking anyway about that. Opera House, which is unfortunately tore down. But anyway, we're talking about Mary Brown Griffin. She was born in 1825 and died in 1882. Now there's a picture. That's really not her. That's just a picture of a person in that era, okay? Because we don't have the picture of her. But we do know that she was African American, and we know that her husband was also an African American. And they both lived in Shakopee in 1852 to 1854. Now it's interesting that in May 3rd, 1852, I think it is, Mary Brown Griffin was on the Minnesota Belle, which is the steamboat, on the river here. And they're heading beyond Shakopee, they're heading up the river to a new town that was being built near Blue Earth, Minnesota. Now Mary Brown is interesting. She was born in 1825 or so in Virginia. She was enslaved. At some point she escaped and went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh she met James Griffin, and they got married. So again, we have these pictures of people, but that's not real people because we don't have pictures of them, okay? But we happen to know that James actually built the Minnesota Belle with other people, okay? And when it was ready, James and Mary, along with their 3 children at that time, decided to move west. And so they headed on the thing. They said it was mostly an immigrant group of people on the thing, all headed there. The captain at that time, Captain Samuel Huberson, headed up and down the river with his boat. In the winter of 1853, he sold the boat built in Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania, the steamboat. They christened it the Minnesota Belle. The captain loaded the boat with immigrants headed on the new town of near Blue Earth. And the Griffin family was also there. What's interesting is they were headed back past here, headed up the river, and then they found that when they got to the Little Rapids area, okay, which is Carver, Chaska area, it wouldn't go up. It's stuck, it wouldn't go. They tried, and he said the captain abandoned the river, the township in disgust. And so they took the steamboat, moved back to Shakopee, and unloaded. In fact, in a book about Shakopee, it says the Minnesota Belle landed in Shakopee. At that time it was called SHAK apostrophe PAY, okay? And that, of course, was Minnesota territory. He said the boat was from Pittsburgh, bound for the upper part of the valley, and this large cargo of freight and passengers were established Shakopee's reputation as the head of navigation. This incident was used to good advantage by the citizens to secure new settlements. And of course, one of the settlers was, or a group of them was James and Mary. We know that James worked as a carpenter here in Shakopee, and then after about a year, he got enough money to buy a horse and buggy, and so he had, and he helped people move to the Minnesota territory. So people would come here, and he would take them to Buffalo, for example, and they would set up a town that way. Then he'd come back, go to the next place like that. We know that in 1955, or actually 1956, the family themselves, the Griffin family, moved to Buffalo. So they're here only for 2 years. It's also interesting because then they had a stagecoach line that they ran back and forth in there between Buffalo and Monticello, and 3 times a week from Monticello to Minneapolis. And of course, Mary, who we mentioned here, of course, died on May 22nd, 1882. Cholera sporadic. I can't spell it or say it, but it's Cholera and then Sporadic. Got it?
Cholera.
You know, basically, right, okay. But what's interesting is that she was buried at St. Joseph Catholic Church, which was in North Minneapolis. It was a log cabin church. It served 100 German families. Mary was not German. She was African American. She was probably not even Catholic. But she was living in Minneapolis near her couple of kids. So, I don't know, but she was buried there. So there's actually a stone there that's still there that shows her. But she was living here in Shakopee for 2 years. So it's just kind of interesting. Okay? So that's about them. It's also interesting because her husband, you got a picture there with James Griffin, is that there's pictures of them, but what's most interesting is that he was able to read and write. And he also was enslaved. What happened to him is that his master didn't want to go to war, so he had him go instead. And so he was there for 4 years, learned the carpentry trade, and learned to read and write. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in to the whole thing. So that's just another thing that's kind of interesting. And then finally, the last one we have to talk about, one of my favorites, is Jane Lamont Titus. Who has Jane Lamont Titus? Okay, and that's a picture of her. That's actually a drawing that we did about her, but we do have a picture of her also. She was born in 1827, died in 1899. When she was 13 years old, she did not speak English. She spoke Dakota. Her father died, and her mother, who was called Hush the Night, was a widow. Her mother and her grandparents, I should say, were near the day Makaska. I'm sorry, but the name of that. Thank you. Did you say that again? Yes, that's right. In my head, but okay. But what we do know is that in 1840, her mother asked Samuel Pond, remember the statue over there, and his family to raise Jane with the Pond family. So Jane lived with Gideon and Sarah Pond and Samuel and Cordelia Eggleston Pond over the next 13 years. They said Jane's mother was around, but just not living there. And that really threw me off for a long time because I said, why would you take your child who was, 13 years old and only spoke one language and just say, here, take this person and raise him? But then I was reading writing tradition for the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and Louis Edred, who's a great author, and she said this fluidity of family comes from Indian tradition. This has always been a part of active life. This ability to hand over a child to a sister or to someone else to raise for a while if you're having trouble. So I think it's kind of interesting. And of course we do have letters, for example, from Cordelia talking about that we had a teacher in our school this winter of her own training. She does very well, I believe. She came to live with us about 7 years ago and has lived either of her family or my brother's most since, which is very interesting. So that's Jane Lamont Titus. Now, why that's so important is the next thing. In 1857, right here, there was a building here. It was the Watson House, okay? And that's where the attorney L.M. Brown was there. In 1857, 3 men, once they forced the Dakota to get out, they had to move to a reservation. So all the people further out there, in basically where Memorial Park is, they said, you gotta go. So they had to leave. And now they had this land there, right? At that time there was nothing there except land, okay? And so they wanted to have those 50 acres of land. So they went to the land office on there and said their story. So you had 3 people, Moses Starr Titus. Someone got Moses?
Oh.
Okay. And that actually is a picture of Moses. And this is the husband of Jane Lamont Titus. Okay. And Thomas Holmes. Oh, sorry. There's Thomas Holmes. People used to call him the father or grandfather of Shakopee, but there were already 600 Dakota Indians living here. But anyway, that's Thomas Holmes. And then Henry Hines is there. And Henry Hines ran the August. Wait for a minute, we'll let him go through. So, what we know is that Moses Starr Titus went here, said, I want that land, and then he explained his thing, and then he went home. Okay? Then Thomas Holmes came, went in. He said same thing. He said, I should have that 50 acres of land because I'm Thomas Holmes. You know, I'm the father of Shakopee, right? So when he left, then Henry Hines, he is of course the newspaper guy, he said the same thing. He said, I want the land. Now what's interesting is that while Moses went home, so put him down, Thomas and Henry were not very happy. They went out of here, this building, went across the street, okay, went into a store, and they threatened each other because they both wanted the land. So suddenly, Thomas Holmes sees the long hair of Henry Hines. So Henry Hines grabbed Thomas Holmes' forehead area. This was in the building. The floor was actually just dirt inside the store. So they started fighting. So the two struggled back and forth and back and forth. It was muddy and wet. Suddenly, Thomas Holmes and Henry Hines were on the floor, each of them with a handful of the other's hairs. Both got up and the fight was renewed. Now they went outside this building because the person in the store was like, get out. So they're outside in the main street right downtown Shakopee, and they continued to fight. The friends of Thomas Holmes, let's say these are the friends of Thomas Holmes, they cheered when he popped Henry Hines. So they did that, everybody cheers over here, right? So then the friends of Henry Hines cheered as he punched Thomas Holmes. So it's back and forth, they're fighting, back and forth. They said the fight continued onto First Street, and the supporters and opponents followed into the street. I mean, it was basically a brawl going on, and everybody was having fun laughing about it, right? They continued to fight while all the people in Shakopee were watching and cheering, except for one person who was there, and that was Jane Lamont Titus. She just watched. She didn't cheer, just watched. Now, meanwhile, Henry Hines grabbed Thomas Holmes' nose. Thomas Holmes gouged Henry Hines' eyes. They reeled onto the street. They fell onto the wet streets of First Street. Blood was flowing out of Henry Hines' nose. Thomas Holmes bled from the gash above his eyes. And the people in Shakopee laughed and cheered. That was not very good. You guys could be better with that. But anyway.
It's entertaining.
Except for Jane Lamont Titus. She just watched. And as she watched, she started thinking and thinking. Jane Lamont Titus knew that she was part Dakota Indian. While her father was Scottish, her mother was Dakota. During one of the treaties with the government, the so-called half-breeds like Jane Lamont Titus were given script when the white people took their land. And so they had that script, and it was based on this 1830 treaty. So they had land, and they said that was for the half-breed people. Okay? That half-breed script arrived in Minnesota in 1857. So Jane Lamont Titus was able to get some script. They said, unfortunately, a lot of the people, the script was bought by spectators and not the Dakota, or part Dakota were there. But Jane Lamont Titus was the lucky one. So while Thomas Holmes and Henry Hines continued to fight back and forth in front of the Watson Hotel, she walked past them into the Watson house, through the door to the United States Land Register office. She pulled out her script, and Mr. Phelps gave Jane deed for the land. So the 50 acres of land, which is Memorial Park and the landing area, that whole area, was actually, they called it the Titus Edition, but it's really not Moses Star Titus. It's actually Jane Lamont Titus who actually did that. And they said Jane Lamont Titus walked outside. As she did, Thomas Holmes and Henry Hines looked up and saw that she had the deed. The people of Shakopee smiled and walked away. Thomas Holmes got up, brushed off the mud and blood, and helped pull up Henry Hines. They had been beaten by a woman. And they say that Jane Lamont Titus, she looked at the bloody men, nodded, and walked home with a smile on her face. And there are pictures actually of their house, which is in that area, again, the area over there. But it's just kind of interesting tying the whole thing about them. And here's actually a picture of a real actual picture of the family, with not the last one, just the first 3 boys of the family. We know just generally that Jane and her husband were involved with the founding of the Presbyterian Church in Shakopee. Moses, who was for 26 years living in Shakopee, 34 years in Minnesota, died in 1878, and he's buried at Valley Cemetery. And Jane Lamont Titus died on March 26, 1999 at age 72, and she's also buried in cemetery. It's just interesting because it's a huge, big thing for Moses, and it's a little thing that was covered up that we found, which is Jane Lamont Titus. But she's the one that should be talking about, because I think it's pretty cool. So that's a little bit about Jane Lamont Titus, again, part of Shakopee history.
That was
Okay.
Valley Cemetery?
Yeah. And we do have things about the cemetery tour and stuff like that also available, just so you know, they come this summer. Okay? So now now you know a little bit about some of the people in Shakopee. There's a lot more, but these are, I think, just ones that they